All right. It is 1:04, so I think we're going to get everything kicked off. I'm going to start by introducing myself. I'm Lily Colley, the co-president of the CUGREA, along with Mallory Torrey.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming.
So first, we want to thank you for making the time for this meaningful conversation during these historically unprecedented times. Mallory and I put together this event in the spirit of fostering collaboration, education, and creating an environment for an informed and respectful dialogue. Mallory and I, like many of you, found ourselves literally and figuratively trapped this summer during the COVID lockdowns, while protests in the name of racial equality broke out across the country. As students of real estate, we felt a responsibility to educate ourselves on the history of the circumstances that led to this point. After reading The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, we were empowered with the knowledge, but also a responsibility to further the conversation around topics addressed in this book in our community at CU Boulder.
So the resulting program here is the first of a three-part series symposium meant to bring together stakeholders from across the industry, including students, advocates, leaders, and major industry organizations to engage in a dialogue about the place the commercial real estate industry has in the ongoing conversations and actions on racial and social equity. Where is the commercial real estate industry coming from? Where are innovative leaders going? And how does innovation, investment, and cooperation help? How can these things help to evolve the industry to be more equitable and bring about real change in our communities? So we are honored to have the support of several people that we want to thank. Preston, if you could move the slide on. So we would like to thank especially the CU Real Estate Center board, including Mike Kirchval and his team of incredible people who really help to support this event to start happening. So it's Mike Kirchval, Lisa Peck, Katie Latier, and Angela Gorbold we want to thank in particular. We also want to thank our GREA executive board, Meg Grindering, Preston Garland, Christina Tonti, Joe Plastino, and Chris Misroon for helping to bring this together. We're also honored to have brought together two major industry organizations to support this event, including the ULI Colorado, and it's the leader of ULI Colorado chapter, Michael Lucchese. Would you like to say a few words?
Yes, I would. We're very pleased to be part of this program. Urban Land Institute Colorado is the 1,400 member district council of ULI, and DEI has become really a top priority of our organization. We're really working hard to diversify the organization and to make progress on this issue of how we can create more equitable outcomes for development, which is in fact the subject of our next major program on December 2nd. Aaron Clark has signed up to be one of our speakers on that. We'll be presenting, along with a great keynote speaker, case studies on how equitable development can work. So again, we are extremely pleased to be part of this today. We hope you can join us on December 2nd. We're delighted to be partnering with NIAP and CUREC and GREA on this today. And I look forward to Susan Powers, Albus Brooks, Aaron Clark, the three people we've gotten to know really well at ULI have been incredible leaders on this topic. I know you'll enjoy hearing what they have to say, and thank you for allowing us to participate.
Thank you so much, Michael. And as Mallory mentioned, we also have the support of the NIAP Colorado chapter. We would explicitly like to thank Tim Schlichting, as well as Larry Lance and Jaima File for their continued support and promotion of this event. We look forward to fostering education, action, and collaboration, and thank you for all of your commitments to expanding your perspectives through this dialogue.
And now we would like to hand it off to our incredible speakers, Albus Brooks, the VP of Strategy and Business Development with Millender White and a CU alumni, Aaron Clark, the Vice President of Master Site Development at the Urban Land Conservancy, and Susan Powers, the President of Urban Ventures LLC. Now, Albus, I'm going to hand it off to you and take it away.
Hey, thank you, Mallory, and thank you for, I just want to thank you and Lily for putting this together. As a CU grad, I couldn't be more excited that, um, you know, our current MBA students and soon to be graduates are taking this topic so seriously and are organizing this incredible conversation. So, what an incredible time to be doing this. So thank you guys for your hard work. And I want to thank all the sponsors, CU Real Estate um, team, and I'm on the advisory board there, and just Michael's leadership is incredible. And so, thank you, ULI, NAOP. Thank you for being a part of this as well. This is incredible, and enjoy our presentation. There's some dynamic folks in Erin Clark and Susan Powers, and we're going to each be giving a 15-minute presentation, maybe a little longer, and then get into question and answers. And hopefully this will be a dynamic conversation for you. Next slide. So my name is Albus Brooks. I'm the former president of Denver City Council. Served on City Council for 8 years. Before that, I was doing some community work all throughout the city of Denver. And before that, I was playing football at a school called the University of Colorado when we were good. I don't know if you guys remember that time, but that's what I did. But literally my whole life and calling has been about rebuilding the American city and rebuilding Denver specifically. And we're going to jump into that a little bit right now. I'm currently doing construction and development for Millender White, which is a construction company that also has development projects. And we operate all throughout Colorado and in Southern California. Next slide. So even before I said the word rebuilding, a lot of folks might have said, "What needs to be rebuilt? This is we have great cities, we have a great country." Well, if you haven't been paying attention this year, a lot of things have been exposed, a lot of things have been open, and I think people are paying attention now. And as you look at this graphic of Black Lives Matter and a part of our city being burnt down, it probably launches all kind of thoughts depending on what silo you're in, the right or the left or whatever. It probably elicits a lot of different responses. Let me just encourage you today. I'm sure everyone has heard about or read about, the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. One of the habits is seek first to understand and then be understood. I'm asking, as we have this conversation, that you seek first to understand what is going on in our cities. What is going on from an equity perspective in our cities? Martin Luther King once said, a riot is the language of the unheard. And I think we need to listen to that and lean into why do these people, these individuals feel unheard in one of the freest, most incredible countries on this earth? Next slide. I could talk about a lot of different issues that have caused wealth gaps, disenfranchisement in our country, but I'm just going to talk about one policy today that I think everybody on this phone agrees with, and it's in World War II. Congress passed the GI Bill, which is a benefits package for individuals who fought in World War II. My grandfather fought in World War II, and actually, if you didn't know, African Americans were not able to actually fight. They dug latrines and service jobs for white soldiers until the end of the war, when they were finally allowed to fight. Well, those benefits were denied. Those GI benefits were denied to 1.2 million African Americans. And this was incredibly detrimental to their wealth growth, their ability to take care of their family. And we begin to see evidence of this wealth kind of gap happen in the United States. And so in white America, The GI Bill was great. We begin to see white flight out of cities, subsidized sprawl, political representation, integration of wealth, sentencing leniency, access to higher education, access to healthcare, which then equals compounding interest in gain. And in Black America, we saw redlining, which we'll talk about in just a little bit, eminent domain, condemnation laws, urban renewal, race rights, Jim Crow laws, voter disenfranchisement, mass incarceration, health disparities, exclusion from the GI Bill of over 1.2 million veterans, a wage gap, and an equal compounding loss and pain. This one bill, I believe, it definitely affected 1.2 million, but it created a gap in our cities that we are still dealing with today. I want to tell you a little bit more. Next slide. You know, I think a lot of us on this call are city builders. We care about our city. And I think a lot of folks are like, well, I didn't have a lot to do with that. And I'm sorry about what happened. But I care about what do we do now? Now, yeah, this is our city and I don't have anything to do with that. And that's not the way it works. Actually, our silence and our lack of understanding of the historical context of what has happened in our city actually puts us on the side of those who have hurt our city. Actually, we become a part of the problem when we don't address and confront the problem. Great quote here that talks about we must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence, our ability to ignore encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Next slide. So I never want to talk about issues like this without making sure folks are very educated. And one of the more powerful books around how we segregated our cities and the compounding issues that has caused now in our communities is The Color of Law. And you heard Mallory and Lily talk about this and they got a chance to read it. And I'm sure they were riveted. I've read it 3 times. I'm about to start on my 4th for the winter. It is just so good. And those of us who are in real estate, those of us who are a part of city building need to begin understanding the injustices that this city, that our country was built on, so that we don't repeat those things, right? The wounds of injustice are not easily healed. Healing only begins when we learn from our past mistakes. Next slide. So I'm not going to dig into this too deeply, but I want you to understand what is happening and how segregation of our cities and redlining has affected our cities. And if you've never heard of redlining, I really want you to read that book, but I will just say redlining is when we, the federal government, down to states and cities, have artificially drawn lines in city to make sure that there is not integration between Blacks and whites and Latinos in our city. And so it has, you can see, and I wish I had this slide here, but Denver, we call Denver the inverted L. And you can still see the legacy of redlining where African Americans, Latinos were not allowed to move outside of those neighborhoods. They were confined to neighborhoods and not allowed to get capital. They were denied resources, opportunities outside. And so they stayed there. And this is what I'm showing in this. If you look in the blue at anti-Black racial entropy, it really means that we don't want to be in those neighborhoods. So you see the white flight, you see housing discrimination, and you even see it today in school choice systems in the city of Denver. It's really sad and unfortunate, but something we must confront. So spatial mismatch theory is when we decide to do the white flight and the housing discrimination and relegate individuals to one part of town, we put them in a part of town where they don't have the same opportunities. They are denied healthy food option. They are denied bank and capital opportunities. They are denied basic issues that every other community has. And then when we gentrify them, the whites who are there ask, why don't we have good schools in this community? Why don't we have a grocery store? Well, this was set up from the very beginning in how we segregated our cities. And then lastly, the cultural poverty theory is we come up with this system, this theory, and how we set people away and we move them out the way. And then at the end of the day, we blame them for being poor because of the situations that we put them in. Yes, we've done that. And what's worse about it, it's in law. So you don't even, it's not even hard to prove, right? Because you just go and look up federal laws that set up our cities this way. Next slide. So it's a lot, but I'm about pivoting. I'm about walking in another direction, and I'm about doing something new. Something I didn't tell you about my past. I'm a recovering minister. So I do have this spiritual component that I believe that when change comes, it comes from the deepest place inside of us. And I believe all of us who are rebuilders of the American city need to start with our posture. And I love this word shalom. It's a Hebrew word. A lot of you probably just think it means peace, but it's much more than peace. It's peace and prosperity. It's restoration, repairing, and inclusive prosperity. Think about that. We are restoring our cities. We are repairing our cities from the brokenness that we caused from years of racism and division. And we're saying we want, our vision is everyone can be inclusive in the prosperity that is happening in our cities. Shalom. Next slide. So how do we rebuild? When I was with the city, these are some things that we started to put in to focus. As most of you all know, city planning really directs where a city is going to be. And Blueprint Denver, which we just redid as a city, is our entire 50-year plan, now has, for the first time in Denver's history, an equity lens towards development, towards green space, towards how we access multimodal transportation. And that is so important, so that when we go into communities, we think about that, a redesign of our communities. So planners typically only go to R&O meetings, registered neighborhood meetings, where people may be friendly, they may not be friendly, but very few go to churches. Very few go to neighborhoods that have gangs in them and meet with gang members. Very few go to the libraries where our communities are. Very few go to the places where most community members are that aren't a part of the R&Os. And this is one thing we really pushed. And then lastly, rebuilding and construction and development space. One thing that our company and I'm really big on is making sure we are hiring individuals from outside of our normal industry who are disenfranchised, giving them an economic opportunity to be a part of the success that is happening in our city, that we're doing in their own neighborhoods. And so rebuilding with economic empowerment. Next slide. Gentrify your own hood. So this is really a slide for the community. But if you are in real estate and you don't know who the guy is with chains around his neck, you should. His name is Nipsey Hussle, and he's actually a rapper who was assassinated in Los Angeles, in Crenshaw. And one of the unfortunate things is that he was assassinated, but the great thing that he did, what you see here, is a building, an office building and retail, where he is opening up this building where he used to sell drugs on the corner, and the owners would call the police on them. And he realized one day that I can't get upset about all this development happening in my community. I need to be a part of the solution and start buying property and building my own community. I love this because this is what I'm talking about. This is what I'm talking about, flipping the script and being inclusive in everything that we do, and not just empowering, but letting folks know that they can be a part of the solution in their own community. Next slide. We're not just building affordable housing. I think it's important that we build housing for neighbors who have been displaced. Few cities have done this. Denver is just implementing this. San Francisco, Portland have done this, that if you've been displaced, you have the first right of refusal to come into affordable housing, which is in your neighborhood. Clara Brown, another great story. This is actual development that's happening in my neighborhood. 1 block from my house. No, Melinda White is not involved in it, but I'm a big supporter of it. Clara Brown was a slave who became a millionaire. It is a great story to read, and she's in the Colorado State House. She is a hero. I could say so much more about it, but if you want to read a great story of transformation in our own state, Clara Brown is someone great. Next slide. So some folks actually are offended by stuff like this. Create entrepreneurial centers for people of color specifically. Why? Because of what we talked about. Equity in my mind, repairing in my mind, is taking a strategic approach to this issue of a balance of equity and saying, listen, because we've done this, we've got to be intentional, very intentional about going after and providing opportunities for folks of color and for folks who have been disenfranchised. When we do that, we then bring repairing to our community, and we start to see transformation in so many different ways. Next slide. This is, I want to bring this to you just because it's happening right now. We're seeing in 5 Points, I call it the 5 Points Black Renaissance. If many of you don't know, 5 Points in Northeast Denver in the 30s and 50s, red line community, African Americans were not allowed to live anywhere else, became this mecca of jazz and cultural renaissance. It was incredible. And in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, it, due to crack and other things, it completely went away and became vacant. And since then, there are a lot of people in this picture. Some of you may recognize Robert Smith up to the left, who's the wealthiest African American in Colorado, went to East High School, not in Colorado, in the United States. Chauncey Billups, NBA All-Star. There are a lot of folks who are in and a part of the development team and opportunities, but we are already seeing, as of now, 8 parcels and properties that are being redeveloped by a Black development group, 5 Points Redevelopment Group, which is incredible, and bringing equity back into this community. Next slide. This is my last slide. And I really want you to kind of reflect on this quote here. You know, everybody talks about what is the future of the city, especially given where we are in COVID, right? Well, I just want to say this isn't one with flying cars or towers that reach to the heavens. It's about regenerative ecosystems, inclusive economies, just societies where equity and social mobility go hand in hand. And I think it's important that before we say a community, a city is economically prosperous, we need to have another measurement of how is the social mobility in that city, right? And when we can make that determinant and high, that an individual can rise in the city because of the opportunity and because of the barriers that are removed, that's when we are prosperous as a city. Okay, I'm gonna introduce now one of my good friends and someone who she's a legend actually in the real estate world. And if you don't know her, you better get to know her. She's a force to be reckoned with. Her last name is Powers, so you know she got it going on. But Susan Powers is the president of Urban Ventures, a Denver real estate development company that has built multiple mixed income mixed use projects around downtown Denver for the past 22 years. The focus is to build communities with strong values of equity and inclusion. She's doing the work, and this is why I want you guys to hear from her. Urban Ventures has led a redevelopment of 17-acre former convent property in Northwest Denver into a model mixed income healthy neighborhood called Auraria Denver that will include 450 residential units and commercial space. She is, by the way, she's doing all this and still getting a return. And I'm sure she'll talk about that, because a lot of folks say you can't do this work without getting any sort of return. They don't understand all the work that goes into it, but she'll talk about it. She's also leading the STEAM on the Platte development, which is the adaptive reuse space in the former industrial property of the Platte River, south of Mile High Stadium. It includes Raíces, Denver's first Latino-owned brewery. Been there a ton of times. Check it out. I'm telling you, you will not be disappointed. She's a member of the board of directors of Denver Health Hospital, and the Elevation Community Land Trust. Participates in many community initiatives going forward regarding affordable housing. But more importantly, she is a great friend and an advisor to me. And I'm so excited to be working on her on some projects, but take it away, Susan.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. I just wanted to start by saying that we're all learning a lot. So as I'm spitting out statistics, these are things that I've learned as I'm reading over the last 2 years. I thought that having been raised in a family that was very involved with the civil rights movement, that I knew a lot of stuff. Well, I now have realized how little I knew. So I have been doing a lot of reading, and some of the information that I'm sharing today is what I have been hearing. And I think it's just important that we take this time. I don't want us to take 2 years to get caught up and not act. I want us to be acting as we're learning, but the learning part of this is really important. And why this is the first slide that shows up here. In 1865, when slavery was abolished, Black Americans had 0.5% of the wealth in the country. Probably not a surprise, because people were not allowed to own property then and all. 135 years later, in 1990, they only had 1% of the wealth. So that was shocking to me, and I never would have expected that to be there. Why is this important? It's important because real estate is the way, in one way, not the only, but one major way that people in this country and in many other countries have accumulated wealth over the years. Next slide. So, I'm going to go back in history a little bit more, because I think we really need to keep in mind kind of how we got to the place we're at now. So free slavery labor was in many people's minds what was responsible for allowing the colonies to develop an economic base and to achieve independence. No one really talks about this, but if you think about how many slaves were working, how many people were brought here from Africa to provide free labor and build and start the cotton industry, which was the largest industry, export industry in the 19th century. When slavery was ended and Reconstruction in 1865 and Reconstruction started, it was intended to kind of overcome those inequities. And the leadership at that time, before President Lincoln was shot, came up with this approach of 40 acres and a mule, and that was that every former slave would be given 40 acres and a mule to allow them to start their own life and with real estate that they were provided. 40,000 free men were given 40 acres and a mule, which was then taken away from them within a year when Lincoln was murdered. So everybody understood even back then how important real estate was to people's ability to move forward in their lives. Next slide. And I won't repeat a lot of this, because this is the map that I think I almost thought it was in all three of our presentations. I think it's in Aaron's and mine, but this is a map that shows redlining in the city. If I start back in the 1800s, the way this country developed was through the federal land grant program, where people were allowed to and encouraged to move further west, and they ended up having a lot of land provided to them for free. But 3/4 of that land ended up in white ownership. There were black codes that were put into place so that black people were not allowed to take advantage of that. They had to have an employer or they were arrested. And that's where sharecropping came up. And I mean, there's just all kinds of things that kept people from what anyone else would call the American dream. 20th century really took all of that history, and we didn't learn anything from it. And we then had this redlining, which was very intentional disinvestment, as Albus has said, but it's also that, and if you read The Color of Law, which I have here as well, read it a couple times, and I was totally shocked at what I was reading, because I couldn't believe that the government was complicit with this. I thought this was just lenders that said, we're not going to lend in these areas that are marked in red. And one of the things, next time you drive near City Park and you go down Ray Street, think about what that word means. And I've never thought, my understanding is that that street was named, and it was basically the boundary for redlining, and it has its name. But in the 20th century, a lot of systemic displacement happened as well. So you always hear about your renewal programs and the federal highway programs that went through Black and brown neighborhoods. The next slide, please. The most shocking thing I learned only in the last week, I'll tell you in a second, was about Central Park. But this is just saying that, you know, what happened, slavery in the 19th century then was replaced with real estate in the 20th century in terms of a way to continue the pattern of not allowing the Black population to take advantage of the economy. Next slide, please. Seneca Village. I had no idea of this and was reading about it and thought I should share it, that Central Park was built on a predominantly Black community. It was, everyone was condemned, the properties were condemned, and even though people would say, well, everybody got fair market value, most of the people living there were not homeowners or landowners, they were tenants. And so they were pushed out of the area, and we have a beautiful park that was built in its place. And this happened all over the country. And this was all public policy that did this. Not, you know, it's a wonderful outcome, but what happened to the people that were there? And we know the answer to that. Next slide. Racial gap today. And I think, you know, as we talk about this, and you're going to hear statistics over and over and over again. And I for one, am someone, I need to hear them over and over again, because they really are sinking into my brain here about what has happened, you know, from the first slave arrival in 1491 that we know of, and then to where we are today. And we're still looking at statistics where we have this kind of disparity between Black households and white households. And the next slide, I think, will be even more shocking. Go ahead. So I don't have to say anything about that, but I think if we, and these have, if you're interested in what the source is of this data, then, you know, just let me know. Next point. So between 1930 and 1960, so this is when the war was over and all these programs were presented for veterans, only 1% of mortgages went to Black families, 1%. And that tells the story of white flight and everything else and redlining, but it has a huge impact in how people have been able to accumulate wealth. People look at a house, and it is that nest egg for your children, the funds for your children to go to college, or for you to have something else that takes you forward in life. And if people have not had that opportunity, then they are really at a disadvantage. So what are people doing about this? Next slide. And how do we address it? And we're not going to get into detail on a lot of this here, but just, you know, I started looking around the country because I think that the conversation in real estate does need to be talking about reparations. And if that's something that is uncomfortable, then so be it, because it is where we are today. Evanston, Illinois is the first city in the country, as far as I know, the only one who has actually created something called a reparations fund. And it is trying to address this issue of their Black residents not having the ability to purchase a home. So it's down payment assistance, low interest and no interest loans. And these are programs that exist right now, but they are focused, I mean, and all the cities, major cities in the country receive federal funds, and they provide this kind of assistance, and nonprofits do here as well. But they're here in Evanston, they're really talking about it in the context of reparations and acknowledging what's happened in the past. Next. Those of you that are around a couple years ago, or maybe it was only last year, and we saw what the outrage was when Inc. Used this kind of a sign about 5 points, and they were, I mean, it was totally irresponsible and stupid on their part, and they got the reaction that they deserved for having this kind of sign there, because 5 points and Curtis Park and what you call Upper Rhino are in a very big transition, or have been in a big transition in this area. And after decades and decades of no investment in 5 points, it has suddenly been the place to be, and the amount of investment that's happened there, until you saw the group of Black business people who are coming in here, it has not been investment that was involving people who have any history and historical context or cultural context in the neighborhood. Next. I've gotten involved with this through through a couple different efforts in investing in entrepreneurs of color, and the Rice's Brewery is one example of it. And you know, it's not something you just say, yes, I'm going to do this. I will, and whoever comes in, I'll rent to them. It is a hands-on, putting your arms around each other and saying, we're going to make this work in every aspect, in terms of helping them to get financing, in the architecture selection, overseeing construction, ongoing operations, dealing with them when COVID hit and saying, okay, don't pay rent now, and now pay half rent, and working with them to help them with the success, because they have an incredible model and I want them to be successful. And Bold Beans is also at Steel in the Platte, and that is a social enterprise with Girls Inc. for a coffee shop and learning business skills there. So that's just probably a small example of the kinds of things I think we all need to be looking at. Next. Then I started to look around the country and of who in the real estate development community is doing interesting stuff, whatever that means. And I found this group in Philadelphia called Shift. They are a B Corp, which we should talk about at some point, about whether that is a model that, I mean, I think it is. If they came around 20 years ago, I'm sure I would have created Urban Ventures as a B Corp. And it's basically that they have shareholders who acknowledge that their profit margin may be a little lower than a venture capitalist investment in it would be, and they're okay with that. It is social investment. They're still earning close to a market return, but there's a very conscious decision within this company to invest in neighborhoods and to keep that investment and reinvest it there. Next. Also in Philadelphia is a program called Jumpstart Kensington. This is operated by a nonprofit there, where they are training people to buy and purchase and renovate homes. And in Philadelphia, you can get homes for a lot less expensive than you can here. But these are people from the Kensington neighborhood, and it is an example of giving people from the area an opportunity to have some of the economic benefit of what's going on in terms of revitalization in the community. And finally, last one is just just some thoughts from me of what the real estate community can and should be doing. We have to be part of the solution. When I think about an extractive business, most people talk about that as mining. You pulling the minerals from the ground and you take them away. In many ways, development, the way we have done this over the course of the last 50 years, is very extractive. We go into a neighborhood. Yes, we invest, but then we pull all the profit out of the neighborhood, and who in that neighborhood's gotten the benefit from it. And I think we have to really change our paradigm to talk about reinvesting, whether it's a portion of the profit, but it's not after the fact. It has to be part of the approach to take in a neighborhood as you're developing it. Increasing diversity within your company is an obvious one, and then the wealth building strategies within projects. I feel like we have in the development community that one of the things that would be certainly achievable if we wanted to do this is that in each of our next development projects, we went out and they're easy to find. People say, oh my God, I don't know anybody of color who's in development. Well, I've been maintaining a list for the last couple of years. So if you don't know anybody, call me because I can introduce you to people. And bring in a partner. They could be a limited partner, but bring in someone of color who is involved, who is interested in development, who has skill set to add to what you're doing, and give them the opportunity to grow with you. And it's not just as an employee, but it's as a partner. And that's it's a harder piece to accomplish. But if we don't do that, then we are just building in neighborhoods and pulling out all of the profit and not letting anybody else have the benefit of it. And finally is just when you wake up in the morning, start your day thinking about, what does equity mean? And think about that in the context of everything you're doing in your business and in your life, hopefully. So next, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Susan. That's what we need, right? A lot of, we need perspective from other parts of the country that are trying to address this. Interesting, 2 examples in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Lot going on there right now.
Certainly today. Yeah.
But thank you for that. Next, we are going to get to hear from Aaron Clark. Aaron joined the Urban Land Conservancy in September 2018 and brings significant experience in redevelopment and planning, due diligence, real estate financing, and acquisition and leasing. As Vice President in Master Site Development, Aaron leads effort to create long-term community benefits on large, multi-phased, multi-use sites throughout Denver metro area, particularly in TOD sites. Aaron is committed to seeing development on thoughtful, sustainable urban infill projects and promote walkability and community cohesion. As a Denver native, East High School, Aaron, go, hey Lolo, hey Lolo. Aaron has worked in the fields of planning development since 2001, starting a role in real estate and affordable housing at the Lowry Redevelopment Authority. She later spent 5 years in the city of Pasadena as a planner in both long-range planning and economic development. There she participated in drafting and adoption of citywide recreation parks master plan and also oversaw large commercial and institutional development projects. Immediately prior to ULC, Aaron worked as the transactional real estate attorney and land use consultant in Denver and Boulder. She holds a bachelor's degree in sociology from Brown and a master's in urban planning from University of Southern California, and a law degree from Madison, Wisconsin. So Aaron is very, very well adept to deal with this conversation. I would also like to say, which I'm most impressive and just proud of her. She is currently the vice chair of the Denver Planning Board and is a member of the real estate section of the council and Colorado Bar Association. So without further ado, Aaron, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Alvis, for the introduction and for inviting me to be a part of this panel today. I'm very inspired by this gathering. I go back and forth over the past 6 months between just being exhausted and wanting to give up and quit and just say, okay, maybe as a Black person, regardless of all of those degrees I've earned and other things, I'm just not really welcome in this country, or I'm not meant to be here. And then we have gatherings like this and I get back into the fight. And I'm happy to be in spaces. And I've learned over this time also to be very blunt. So I'm not gonna tiptoe around anything. I welcome gatherings like this being put together by young white students who have acknowledged the need for this and not just talking about it, but are being about it, but are actually getting in there and working through it. And so, so I appreciate that and definitely want for this to be something where you know, I think we've all been involved in a lot of different conversations like this over these number of months, and that we can turn it into some tangible actions. And so that's what I'd like to share today are just some specific tools. I like to talk about an equitable development toolbox, and there are lots of different tools that we can put into that toolbox of how we approach more inclusive communities. And it takes both sides of the action. It takes both breaking down barriers, breaking down elements that lead to exclusion, but we can't just do that and then think that there will suddenly be inclusion. We have to also be active on the other end of being embracing, being welcoming, and structuring our development projects and our neighborhoods to be actively inclusive. Next slide. So the big theme for me in this presentation and for the organization that I work for, Urban Land Conservancy, is the idea that land is power. I think that is a framing of everything that we're talking about today, and that you've already heard from Albus and Sue, is that land is power. It lends power. It can be wielded as a weapon against others, those who have and those who do not have control of land. And it also is empowering. And that's something that I would also like for us to really think about through this presentation and after, is that this isn't just about land, it's people's use of land and human beings. And human beings are irrational. Human beings have a lot of different feelings. There's a lot of complexity, and it's really important to, I think, remember that there's, you know, what we think we're creating as a system, and then there's how people are actually using it, and thinking about the impact on people and how they feel about themselves as they either have access to land or are kept from it. The quotation on the left here is something that I saw. I was kind of just Googling through just kind of the property rights in general and kind of historically. And this stuck out to me. It says, the reason humans are willing to compete with each other in voluntary trade is because laws exist which protect private property. For a person to receive property he believes is valuable, he must provide a service that someone else believes is valuable, and everyone gains. And I was like, well, that sounds nice, but that's not what our experience has been. So I really, that everyone gains at the end. This is the idea, I think, that we often look at how systems should be. In economics, I know I remember learning this in college. One of my favorite courses was economic sociology. And it was the idea, the main thing I took from that course was that we have in economics maybe these really clean models that say, okay, supply and demand, we are all rational actors. So you have something that I deem of value, and in exchange, I'll give you something that you think is valuable to you. And like this says, everyone gains. Well, that would be great, except that that's not how people work. And so when this is an image at the top of a lot of children picking cotton during the time of slavery in this country. And I know a lot of people may even get triggered at times and be like, okay, why are we always going back to slavery? Can we get over the slavery already? We'd love to. I would love to if we weren't seeing remnants today. Obviously, we have moved on from actually owning people, but I would argue that we have not gotten to the place of moving from Black people being viewed as not at all human to really, we're still not viewed as maybe having full citizenship, being fully equal. When we think about property rights and property ownership in America, as we started, as you know, the initial colonists were here, land conferred rights of belonging. Land conferred voting rights. So really only white men who owned land, freedmen, who were allowed to vote. We've expanded the right to vote over time, but as we're even seeing at this very moment, the battle continues, right? So we're always inching forward, but we're never fully there. And then, as Susan had been mentioning as well, land is the idea of economic freedom. You can farm land, you can create wealth from land, you can get sustenance from land, you can rent it to someone else and get value that way, and you can transfer it. In law school, in property rights classes, they always teach about property rights as a bundle of sticks, that if you own property in fee simple, you have the full rights of ownership, and you have all of the sticks in the bundle. And different people categorize that differently, but this is kind of a primary list where if you own property, you have the rights of possession, you control that land, you can exclude others from that land, you can enjoy it and do whatever you want with that in use, and you can dispose of it. And that is another, so the possession, the control, and the disposition, that's also where we get to concerns about, as Susan talked about, the statistics of Black wealth in this country. So much was built upon those who owned the land first, had the right to exclude others from that land, and were able to pass it on, either to sell it or to pass it down in their families. So that's kind of where you're talking about, if we are running a race, white men in this country had the land, had the control, were able to, as this quote said, they were able to get something of value. Someone was providing a service to them in terms of slavery of working the land, but they never, the slaves weren't getting anything in exchange. They weren't building any wealth or getting any value from that. Next slide, please. So I'd like to talk about just one way of, I think it's important for us not to always live in the figurative black and white, in terms of, again, we might have this, we started the country with this idea that, okay, if you're going to own land and you control that piece of property, and that's how you build wealth, but it's all about private property. It's about your particular part of the world, your particular parcel, and that's the only way that we can do this. I want to talk about community land trust as a way of looking at private property also has some, or private property ownership can have some negative externalities and impact on the broader community. And so how can we look maybe at some models where we're not just stuck with this is our private property model, but there's a shared ownership between an improvement on the land and the land itself. So on the left here, we see, again, traditional property ownership is that a private owner owns the land and anything that gets built on top of that land. They then can sell it to someone else or they can hold on to it, but any value is coming directly to them. This quotation on the side, I really love. Only part of a property's unencumbered value is a product of an individual's personal investment in purchasing and improving the property. The rest of it, often the bulk of it, is a product of the community's investment and equity accruing to the property over time because of the public investment in necessary infrastructure, roads, schools, utilities, et cetera, and economic growth in the surrounding society. I know we had some questions in the chat, and we can discuss later about gentrification. This really speaks to that for me. What if we looked at land, some lands certainly purely private, but what if we also sometimes looked at it as a public benefit as well, and invested in that? I mean, these are public investments, but the value of that, for example, if I go buy some property knowing that a new train station is going to come in, then once that train starts, my property value goes up. But I needed to have enough initial investment to be able to take advantage of that opportunity to buy the land in the first place. What we've seen historically is that white men more typically would have that wealth already to be able to take advantage of that opportunity. Black individuals and families are starting well behind the 8 ball. So this, again, I just wanted to, I'll talk more about this in future slides, but I wanted to at least just tee up the idea of a split estate. So where the land is owned communally, the land is owned potentially by a nonprofit or some other group that has the public interest in mind, and then the private property is the improvement, and whoever owns the improvement is leasing the land. And again, I'll talk in more detail about that in future slides. So next slide, please. So the land trust in action. In this country, the first community land trust is considered to be New Communities, which was in Albany, Georgia, and was started in 1969. And this is specifically, this kind of brings the past to the beginning to the civil rights movement and then to today. New Communities was started by Charlie and Shirley Sherrod, again, Albany, Georgia. It was specifically born out of the civil rights movement, and Shirley herself is a child of sharecroppers. Sorry, my screen just did something weird on me, sorry. And this is something where, again, Black families did not have the same investment capacity, wealth going in 1969. So what folks did was pool their resources and decide we are going to buy some agricultural land in Southwest Georgia together. And then individuals can build their own homes or other things on top of that property, and they would work together to farm the property, to sell produce that was grown on that property, and then share in those profits as a wealth building opportunity for all of them. Because again, on their own, this was not going to happen for any of them individually. So they found a way to kind of skirt the system and say, well, maybe if we work together, we can do this. They were successful at first, but then there was, I believe it was a drought. And so a lot of farmers in the area were not able to derive value from their property ownership for some time. And a lot of the white farmers went to the federal government, to the Farm Bureau to get loans. Loans were given out to many of the white farmers. Loans were not offered to this group of Black farmers. They ended up losing their land. So this is something too where land is power. They had the land, they were able to get some value from it, but at the end of the day, humans were still involved in the process. It should be, okay, you own land and you need this and you qualify, that's fine. But race is something that makes us inherently irrational. And this is a situation where, because of the color of their skin, they did not have the same opportunity to hold on to the land that they had gotten a foothold in the first place. So this again speaks to, you know, we love this idea that, okay, capitalism is fully fair and everybody is a rational actor and you'll earn some money and then you turn it into, you invest in something and then you invest in something else and all these things. But then even when sometimes we get a foothold, there are still setbacks. This was an example of that. They went through a lawsuit. 12 years later, they actually did win a settlement, which allowed them to buy Resort, which is what they have now, which is actually much larger than what they started with. They now own 6,000 acres, and it is property that that was once owned. It was once the kind of largest plantation and had the most slaves on a property in all of Georgia, and that is now owned but that property is now owned by descendants of slaves. And so that is an amazing story. We're hoping that they're able to hold on to it now. They're farming it currently. Next slide. But here's where we get to today. The housing continuum. I think it's really important for us to think about ladders of opportunity. And that's how I view housing. So if we think about from homelessness to home ownership to market rate home ownership, you know, there are a lot of folks who will say, okay, well, everybody has the same shot. If you can look at the numbers that exist and including what Susan shared earlier, if you can look at the numbers of the wealth gap between whites and blacks, of, you know, educational attainment, of all of these different metrics, and you can say that everybody in America has the same shot, then that's what I call faith-based thinking. It's not religious. I mean that you are just saying, I just have faith that this is how things are, and I just choose to think that that's true, regardless of what my eyes are telling me that something else is happening. What that also means to me is that if you can see those disparities and not think that there's a systemic problem, then you have to own that you think that people of color are naturally inferior. And I bring that out, and I've said it at other times, but I think it's important to just say, like, you need to own that then. But otherwise, we need to look at what systems are in place and how, you know, no, Black people are no longer owned, but the discrimination has just evolved. It has just gotten more sneaky, but it still exists. So a CLT model is something that can help bridge the gap. So it's not just, okay, maybe you rent this home and then there's market rate home ownership. If you can just click rather than going to the next slide. If we look at this ladder, it has kind of even rungs right now. But what we actually see in the real world is that, oh, maybe the animation's not working, is that often there's a rung in that ladder that's missing. And if there are missing rungs in the ladder, that means it's that much more of a stretch for a family to get from one step on this continuum to the next. We need to make sure that we are always working to fill those in. So a CLT is just one option where it's the idea of shared equity home ownership. So you have ownership of some property, but you don't take all of the equity that goes into that, because again, a part of that increase in property values came from public investments. So instead we split it. So if you go to sell your improvement in a land trust structure, then you will get a portion of the equity. So that helps you on your path to getting to market rate homeownership, for example. But a part of that goes back into the land. It's keeping that investment in the land so that that can be passed forward, paid forward to the next household. And so again, it's just important, I think, to think about, to live in the gray, to not just say, okay, there's only, you know, this type of home ownership and that's it, or this is the only way that we can look at property ownership. I think it's important for us to be creative about this. And so again, this is just one option for that. I believe that's it. Next slide. So I just wanted to point out briefly, there are 6 community land trust organizations really operating in Colorado currently. There are hundreds across the country, but it's definitely looking to be a more used model. We see here examples of a condominium development here in Denver that uses a land trust model. So that's a home ownership model with condos. We see more traditional single family homes and townhomes. And then on the bottom right, this can also be used in a non-residential sense, and that speaks to more of that community investment as well. So it was formerly a charter school. It is now the home of the Center for African American Health in Northeast Park Hill, but it is on land owned by a nonprofit, owned by us at Urban Land Conservancy, and then the health organization owns the building. So they're able to build wealth and provide services but it was cheaper for them because they didn't have to buy the land as well. So that's something that's also where we're able to pay it forward, maintain a community investment that will serve and hopefully kind of counteract some of those gentrifying forces as well. So that's just another example of a model that we are using now. And then that's it for me for now, and happy to address any questions.
Thanks, Aaron. Mallory and Lily, would you like to lead the question and answer?
He would. I know Mike is going to jump on and say one thing, and then we'll dive into that. So anyone who needs to move on with their day, I know we're at our time, but we are happy to stay on if you guys have the time and moderate this conversation. We will also send out this recording after. Mike, are you on there?
I'm on there, and this has been absolutely fantastic. And I want to thank, first of all the participants who joined us today. I think that's an absolutely brilliant move and step in the right direction. And so thank you to the participants and to our speakers, Albus, Susan, and Aaron. Extraordinary, bravo, thank you. I'm so glad we have this recorded, and thank you for the time and energy that you're putting into this. I also want to acknowledge Mallory and Lily for their vision in pulling this together and working with this panel. Thank you for doing that. And a shout out to my friend Michael Lachese of ULI, and also the NAOP organization, who've joined us in a partnership to bring this to our community and to our students. Just a personal perspective, there's so many problems, and I think we talk a lot about problems, but finding a way to get to solutions is what we are trying to do. And I think you've done this brilliantly today, combining education, knowledge, discussion, and then leading to action. Those are the four things that I feel very strongly about at the university and the business school and the real estate center that we can do with our community. So I want to applaud all of you. And again, thank you all for making this possible. And I hope we'll see you on the next two sets of this discussion as we move forward. It was mentioned the recording will be available of the presentation, and gets emailed or is available to the people who signed up for this. And then Mallory and Lily, I'll turn it back to you to moderate our questions. And again, thank you to the two of you for making this happen today.
Yeah, thanks again to everyone. So I'm just going to dive right in. We've gotten several good questions. One that is really looking straight to what Aaron was just speaking at. Looking at land from the perspective of the bulk of equity accruing over time because of public investment, would it be just as fair to argue for high Georgist or land value taxes instead of shared ownership, so that the bulk of those equity value increases can be delivered back to the community? And then a follow-up, in both cases, there is a government, either the CLT board or a local municipality, that distributes the benefits back to the community. But I wonder if there are more equity concerns with one path or the other.
I can start, and then I would turn to Albus for some of this too, because I'm certainly not kind of a property tax expert in any way. And I know, I mean, we certainly all understand the inherent inequities in how we fund our school systems, for example, or other things kind of based on individual property taxes. I'm always about an all of the above approach. So I don't think that it's an either or, that, oh, you do land trust or you do, I think it's about what's available at the time. And we always need to look to short-term solutions and also be reaching for long-term solutions. So I would certainly think that, creating more equitable distribution of property tax revenues and kind of how that works and how we are reinvesting in our communities is certainly important. One example of that is the linkage fee that, of course, Albus worked on when he was in city council here in Denver, in terms of trying to have development help pay for other city needs, particularly affordable housing. I would definitely not want it to be that, oh, we need to do that and not do this other thing. I think it's that we need to be considering all possible approaches, and some will, just based on culture or political norms in different parts, different communities across the country, some things are more doable than others. So I just, I think it's something that's certainly worth considering.
Mallory, I didn't hear the last part of that question, but I'll tell you, we are so far behind in addressing this issue that Aaron's approach is right. It needs to be a multi-layer, very broad swath of what we're trying to do, whether it comes from, taxes, whether it's land use policies. I sat on National League of Cities, national board with other mayors and city council, and we put together an entire list of options for cities to look at, and it included all of these issues. And so I think a lot of times when you come from the private sector perspective, you think about a silver bullet. Let me be very clear: there is no silver bullet here. There are a menu of options, of broad perspectives, many initiatives, including land use policies, including tax incentives, including tax initiatives that need to go hand in hand to create a more justice and equitable environment in our cities.
Great. Well, thank you. So I have another question that I think is really good, kind of looking at everything that we've been talking about today. So specifically in the color of law, Rothstein suggests that to bring healing, integration needs to be a top priority. How does this happen without getting labeled gentrification? How do communities see integration as a positive process versus a negative process?
You know what? I want to see if Susan wants to go. I have some thoughts on that, Susan and Aaron. But Susan,
yeah, I guess what I would say is that it is necessary to have investment in communities. And I think that's in the tipping point is when there's so much investment that everybody that was there gets no benefit from it and they get forced out. So it's a question of how you do the development with community buy-in, literally communities that are part of people that have been there for generations, that have small businesses there. How do you create an environment they can stay? How do you create an environment that people that are living there that have been there for generations can stay in the context of the development that's going on? And it's not easy. I mean, there was somebody who's sending me notes here on the side too, talking about, these things take forever. I mean, how do we, I would talk about the ARIA project. I've been involved for 15 years. It's like enough, right? How we don't have 15 years. So how do we implement some of these things in a quicker way, so that, because so often we find that when it's too late. By the time we notice this is happening, we go, oh shit, how did we forget? How did we not notice it? What happened to that one? What happened to this? What happened to the neighborhood coffee shop? So we have to get ahead of that. And developers are generally pretty good about looking at what's going on in neighborhoods. We snoop around a lot. We're trying to get ahead of other people, but we're not doing it in a way where we are going into the neighborhood and having them be part of the conversation about what's happening and how can they be part of the success story. So that's what I would say.
I first of all, Susan Powers is the only person who can cuss on here, and everybody be like, "Yeah, amen." But
it comes with age, it's okay.
You can do that when you Susan Powers. But I would just say it is so interesting to me that we get overwhelmed with this issue. But if we are looking at let's just go back to Denver. But before urban renewal, we wanted to redevelop. Susan, you were the executive director of Denver Urban Renewal. We wanted to redo Denver and do all this stuff. Folks weren't overwhelmed. You know what they did? Everyone came to the table. They figured out a city plan. Everyone who were developers, they figured out within their role what they were going to do. And that's what we need to do here. We need to figure out macro plans for cities, and every development organization, commercial real estate partner needs to figure out within their organization, how will they accomplish this overall plan? Let's stop getting overwhelmed by this, because we do it in every other area of our life. And we look back 10 years and like, oh my gosh, look what we accomplished, right? We have to be diligent. We've got to be focused. The development community here in the Denver metro area has accomplished more than then everyone, trust me, because everyone all over the country for 10 years when I was the president of city council would come and look and say, my gosh, how did you guys accomplish this? Union Station, this and that, you know? And so let's focus and let's accomplish it together. Aaron, I don't know if you have any thoughts.
I would just like, yeah, I want to add some.
Aaron, you're still off.
Yeah, you got muted, Aaron. There you
Sorry,
go.
can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, we can hear you.
Apparently my phone connection dropped off. So you can hear me now through the computer?
Yep.
Okay, sorry. So I like to kind of bring in some of the soft skills on things like this and kind of just the psychology of so much of this. Again, someone kind of, I think it resonated with, again, we get tired of when we're talking about reparations and it's like, well, yeah, that's back to slavery and all these things, but remembering all of the things, Albert's had such a long list to start with of redlining and GI Bill and, going back to homesteading and all these things where, there were basically subsidies given to white people and not given to Black people, or that they got them and then were taken away. All of these things have happened over time. I think it's important that when we are developing currently, that we really are viewing it as looking at our return on investment in terms of, but what are we leaving for that community? And that everything that we're building is in context, and it is about community building. It is not just, I put up this building on this site and then I walked away and did something else. Because guess what? The building that you left behind, there are people there who have to pass it every day, and it's a part of their community, and it's either a positive or a negative to that. Susan and I are working with a community currently about trying to make sure that if there's going to be a large redevelopment,
Aaron, we lost you.
to
I'm going to finish her sentence.
residents.
Oh, there she goes. Well, let me.
Sorry, this is why I was on audio.
Okay.
Yeah, you go and I'll switch my audio.
Okay. No, so we're working on something together where we are really digging deep into what will be the impact on the community. This is not me as a developer. This is me as a landowner in the area. And with a large development coming forward, how can we make sure that the neighborhood that's most impacted gets some benefits from it? And somebody else asked me something in a private one that I think, I haven't ever thought about it this way, but when we ended World War II, when World War II ended, the United States stepped forward with the Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe. That was a huge undertaking on our part, and something that this country was so proud of. We did this overseas, and we're now looking at that here in a different way, but with this issue, and people are saying,
I've lost Susan's audio. Has everybody else? Yeah. Sorry, Susan, you just blanked out. I can't hear you.
We got right to the crescendo though.
And I wish I could finish her, but I think we got the gist of what she's saying is that our country has figured out many times how we address incredible issues. I mean, the GI Bill is unbelievable, so much so that the German Marshall Fund was set up to give money back to America because they were so incredibly moved by what had happened. And so I agree with you, Susan, that we can figure this out. We can set up these generational shifts and these investments in communities that we have done obvious wrongs to. But like I said before, I think there's a lot of pushback towards that. But I would like people to think, but you talked about reparations. I like to take, what's the root word of that? And it's repairing. How do we repair?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So, sorry, I just wanted to I agree absolutely with what Albus and Susan have said. And I just wanted to add that, you know, this country is clearly never going to get to a place of having a proper kind of truth and reconciliation process, because that is what has allowed other countries with atrocities in their past to actually, you know, properly move forward. But instead, we keep denying it. And that's where I get back to the kind of faith-based thinking of being like, well, we don't want to think about that. It shouldn't matter anymore. So therefore it doesn't. But telling yourself it doesn't matter, that race is not really an issue, does not make it go away or make us not be acting that way anymore. And so that's why I think it's so important that, you know, in terms of anti-gentrification, if we are going in and creating new developments in communities that are vulnerable to involuntary displacement, it is incumbent upon us to make sure that we are looking at the people who live there now and valuing them as they are, valuing the communities that we're going into, not coming in and saying, oh, well, we promise this is going to be better based on my definition of what that is. We need to do the work to go in and ask questions. It make our developments more difficult, and we can't deliver on everything, but we need to try. We need to do more than, oh, the city said I have to have this one community meeting, so I've checked that box. We need to do the work. We need to go and talk to people and listen and say, how can we make this work for those who are there and understand those who are there and respect what is important to them.
Thank you all so much for your perspective on that. We have one last question, but I think that was a really incredible segue. And this will be our shameless plug. In the new year, we're going to be having part 2 and 3 of this event. And that is really continuing to focus on different ways in which this issue has manifested, been effectively addressed. And I think we can start off with our kind of final question, which is, specifically, can you each give an example of how stakeholders in the industry can get involved in local neighborhoods more effectively, rather than just showing up to that one kind of token meeting, and we can take this and what we've learned from this conversation and really start to shape what we're going to do in part 2 and 3 to have some meaningful learning takeaways?
Well, I can answer that. I'll start with an example of, this is a Denver Housing Authority project, and I was involved with it more on the consulting team, but this is Mariposa, 10th and Osage. The reason I want to use this is to point out how important the whole team is, that you have to have everyone in your team, starting with your architects and everyone else, has to have this on their mind, has to have equity, and they have to approach their work in a way that will be asking the hard questions. So in that community, the architect, who was out of Seattle, actually had an anthropologist on their staff, which I thought was incredible. This is Methuen Architects, who moved into the Lincoln Park homes for 9 months into the neighborhood as the planning was getting started, and just talked to people. And when she came out of that, what she heard from people was that the most important thing to them was not what we thought. It was health. It was the health of their families and health of their children. And therefore, our focus then became on how do we create all the opportunities for people to live a healthy life. We would never have had that input if there hadn't been a deep sense of what, I don't even know how you do that if you don't have an anthropologist in your staff, but there are ways of talking to people in the way Erin has said, which are different than our traditional ways of going to that RNO. So I think it has to be very conscious, and you have to be willing to be thrown out of a meeting occasionally and be told to go away, but it's a question of how much you're committed to do that. And also for developers like me that are white, we need to find minority partners. We need to find Black and brown people who will be our partners in these developments, bring them to a point where they can actually have the economic benefit of what you are creating in that neighborhood. And I can't say that it's hard. It's a hard thing to do, but it's not impossible, and it's just something we need to be working towards.
Erin?
Yeah, I mean, it's I absolutely agree with what Susan said, and I've had a lot of conversations with other groups around kind of building a deeper bench and a longer pipeline of people of color who are actually doing this work, who, you know, because I mean, we all know, I got into planning because I found myself really impacted by my community, how things were built, and you know, how transit systems worked and all those things. And I got very excited, and but from grad school to today, I am regularly the only one in the room who has that background and is involved. And so, you know, it's a lot of, you know, very well-meaning people, but it's most city planners across this country are white, and they are making decisions for communities of color. So that's one thing that's really important, but also just as developers, you know, understanding, again, what we're doing, we focus on kind of the details of getting entitlements for the land and our building permits and our construction financing and all these things. But at the end of the day, this is about people. It's about relationships, and context really matters. And so, you know, how you show up and forming true relationships with people. You know, I've seen so many, and even, you know, very well-meaning developers too, but will show up to a community meeting and just stand there and use so much jargon and just kind of, you know, talk about all these things that have already been established. And this is the first time that they're even meeting members of the community. So it is so important to just have relationships and really respect people and recognize, again, the value that they bring, that they could actually make our projects better. Not always coming in and viewing community as other or community as opposition, or, you know, some barrier to what I want to do. You know, I really think that we have to be building coalitions and think of things more as a team, and not that I know better and I'm just going to tell you what I'm going to do here. So I just think, again, just meeting people where they are and treating them as equals is really important.
Yeah, this is the most important, I think, piece of all the work we're talking about. And I'll use an example from LA, because we're doing a job there, because Denver is not fair, because I've been getting beat up in Denver for about 20 years doing community outreach. But I forget, even though I know communities, you know, you got to do the outreach, I forget, because I'm trying to accomplish all the other raising capital, closing the deal, all of those other details. I forget the most important thing you can do is give your time in community. So Susan said earlier, moving into the community, not everybody's going to do that, right? We know that. That's the best thing you can do. The second best thing you can do is find the best restaurant. Especially, I'm helping you out if you're dealing in communities of color. If you're dealing with a Black community, you're dealing with a brown community, communities of color, we love to eat and we love the food. And I was just in Inglewood and went to the restaurant. And we spent, I only had 30 minutes, and we spent 3 hours there with community members, just hanging out, just connecting. And we found some incredible opportunities to partner, and we're changing direction on some things too, right? So, you know, that's the other hard thing. We come in with our plans complete to telling the community, okay, this is what it's going to be. It's good for you. Trust me, you know. And they come in there thinking, you know, I had a jacket on, I'm looking cool. They're like, what you trying to buy? You know, and really meeting people, like Aaron said, where they're at is one of the most important things you can do.
Great. Well, I think that's going to do it for us today. So thank you guys so much for coming. We had a great turnout. And I mean, these past couple of days have been very stressful for me personally, and probably everybody. And this felt really good to have real honest conversations about where we are in this country and what we can do better going forward. So I hope you all are able to attend our next couple of events that we have in the spring. where we'll be continuing this conversation on. So yeah, everybody have a really great day, and good luck bringing social and racial equity to your work. That's what we want to do. That's our goal here. All right, well, have a great afternoon, everybody. And thank you again to all of our speakers.